What is up, everybody? Welcome back here to the Devy YouTube channel. We're back, but with a different type of video today. One that we haven't done here on this channel, and I'm excited to do it. I've been talking about doing it, and I'm finally going to jump in here. And that is a Cornerstone Rankings video. Now, in terms of what we're doing here, we're looking at the top 24 players under 25, and they're not quarterbacks, right? Now, this will knock off some of your favorite guys. So remember, it has to be under 25 at this moment. So you're not going to see some familiar names here because they're just over that threshold. They just turned 25 this football season. So there's some guys underneath that are close here. So, don't come in the comments yelling at me like, hey, you missed this guy. It's all based on age here. So non-quarterbacks under 25. And then who are these guys when you're looking at the Cornerstone rankings, right? And Cornerstone rankings can be different depending on what site you're looking at. Dynasty League Football, DLF.com. They started them. They should get the credit for always doing this. They look at basically last year's class, this year's class, and sometimes next year's class, or they do that under 25 rule as well. There's been different variations. I mean, we have Dynasty rankings and Devy rankings on our Patreon. So, there's all kinds of ways. But the way I look at it is that these guys are the elite, solid athletes. However many you have of these assets on your roster, plus the veterans you fill out, you're more likely to create a dynasty, right? You really like to continue your league and who has some value up. So we are looking at those top 24 of under 25, and then also some value risers, right? Who are some guys in those tiers? So we're gonna be looking at tiers here. I'm going through elite, right underneath that, and as we go down, and who are some guys though can get into that elite category after Jamar Chase ages out, for example. So we're gonna be looking at that, kind of talking about that. And just remember, we're looking at just in terms of PPR, very standard 12-team PPR league with a little bit of a tight end premium. Most people play with tight end premium. But it's like a 1.5. That's kind of how I determine this one because I do want to give the tight ends a little bit of a bump because most dynasty leagues out there have some type of premium. But the two guys that I put on here, the little spoiler alert, I think that they deserve to be on here even if there is no premium because of the way they play and who they are at the position. So let's get into it. So this first tier here, and again, if you disagree, jump in the comments. I love this a little bit of discourse in there when you're not calling me a dumbass. I appreciate that. And just talking about, hey, who would you put in this tier otherwise, right? So right now there's two guys for me, and this is the S tier. This is the lead tier. Now there's a few guys right underneath this we're going to talk about that could definitely shoot their way up there, and you might have a couple of them in there already. But for me right now, it's Chase. And really, what do we need to say about Chase? I mean, you could arguably say, him and Jefferson have been that 1-2 for the last couple of years. If you can build around him, he's 24.8, so that's why he makes it under this right now. But I mean, not again with Chase, you know what you're getting. You're getting the targets. He's going to be with the Bengals. They're going to get him that contract. He's with Joe Burrow. We've seen it produce top 10 weeks, week in, week out, and he's a game changer, right? If you have him in your lineup at any point, you can go for 200 yards and 2 touchdowns. You're going to win your matchup. Now, the new guy in this tier, and the one I don't know if I'm going to get pushed back or not here, it's Brock Bowers. And I think that he's firmly tied in 1 in Dynasty, but I think he's reached Travis Kelce material, right? When you're thinking of what he's done as just a receiver this year, right? As we're recording this, this is prior week 14. So when we're talking about what he's been able to do through 12 games, 84 receptions right there, second all time. When we're looking up historic numbers, right behind Odell Beckham Jr. for rookies. You're also talking about all-time rookie reception record for tight ends. Sam Laporta had 86 last year. So now you're looking at Bowers definitely going to break that probably this weekend before the games. As I said, I'm recording this before the games go. But if he continues this pace, right, he's up for over 1,200 yards, almost 115 receptions, and possibly 6 touchdowns. He could have he could set the single season reception record among tight ends. That's at 116 by Zach Ertz. It's in the realm of possibility, right? So when you're thinking of what he's been able to do, right, 884 yards, right behind Terry McLaurin, CeeDee Lamb, those guys right there, 84 receptions already. He leads the entire NFL with that right now, right? Jamar and Lamb being right there with 79. So when we're thinking of what Brock's able to bring to the table from a fantasy perspective, he is a difference maker in your lineup, just based on what he's been able to do. 8 top 12 weeks this year, tight end 1 in week 13 when you saw him put up those huge numbers there, 113 targets already. He's been phenomenal, right? So he has been phenomenal this season. And I think that if you're looking at a startup, he's going top 12 picks. Even a super flex startup, right? So you got the quarterbacks, you're getting Chase. You might get some wide receivers in there. Maybe, obviously Jefferson's going to be there. Chase, maybe a couple other guys. But then when you're looking at some of the younger guys, do you build around Bowers knowing that he's a positional advantage as Travis Kelce was? that's my argument for putting him here, because he does give you an advantage over other positions. And I do think moving forward, he's their wide receiver one, right? If I'm going to put a guy here, I think he's that wide receiver one. He's their go-to guy. Now, what does that look like next year? Free agency, everything's coming there. Maybe they do add a guy, but I think that he's a superstar. I think his talent transcendizes everything. He's going to be at worst tied into wide receiver 2 in that offense, but he can play in a slot. He can do anything that you ask him to do. Even from a rushing standpoint, he could do it. I don't know if they're going to start asking him to do it, but he can definitely do it and kind of be that all-purpose weapon, especially when they get maybe a new play caller in there. So that's my argument for Bowers in there. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you put Bowers in this tier, or would you put him in the next tier? Right. So we're looking at the A tier. Remember, these players are still good. Like we're not crapping on these players at all. Like these guys are still elite in its own right. And all of these guys, in my opinion, are either going to be first or second round picks in there in terms of a start at. Now, the next guy's Neighbors, Malik Neighbors there. And some would argue that he should be in the S tier. I think him, Nakua, could definitely be two guys that you put in that S tier. I think Puka Nakua, the big problem with him this year was just the injuries. He's been banged up, right? But last year we saw the talent. Malik Neighbors has looked amazing this year. I think the big question is, what does that quarterback play look like, right? Is he going to be hinged there? And then you got Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, I might still be too bullish on Marvin Harrison Jr., right? But you look at the season. When you're looking at it right now, I mean, he's been okay, right? So when we're thinking of just raw number-wise, he's been off to kind of a slow start at times. He has 41 catches, still has 78 targets, 600 yards, and 7 touchdowns, which is still okay. I think there's a chance Harrison finishes with close to 1,000 yards this year, maybe 800-900 in that range, but he's still talented enough to warrant being a elite talent in the top 2 tiers, right? I do think Marvin Harrison Jr. is there. Now, there are some haters out there with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think that, it's less about Marvin Harrison's talent and what he puts on the field and more about maybe the scheme. I don't know if Kyler Murray plays a role in that, but I do think they can get on the same page there. I just think Marvin Harrison Jr. deserves to be there, but I do have him a little bit behind Neighbors and Nakua. I think with Neighbors, he's a clear wide receiver 1 there. If they do get a quarterback upgrade there, I think that you're looking at him being kind of that Chase-ish version there. And then you have Nakua there, who is, again, he's got Cooper Kupp there, but if that offense with Stafford, I still think he's there. I still give Neighbors the kind of bump up a little bit, based on a few things. Draft capital for sure. I think production is going to be there. I do think that clear wide receiver 1's going to be there. So that's why I lean Neighbors. Then, Garrett Wilson and Bijan Robinson. And this is the other thing. When I was doing this, it is extremely hard to get running backs in here because the way you build, right? The way I build dynasty rosters, wide receiver through, value, where's the value roll? And then you're looking at, do I bump Bijan down a little bit or do I keep him here? And the reason why I keep Bijan Robinson here, one, he's a hell of a talent, right? We know that, what he can do on the field. And the other thing, when you're looking at running backs, he's the clear guy, right? He's that running back 1. These other guys that are coming, I think that when you're looking at in the next tier, they might have some competition there. But when you're looking at Bijan Robinson, he's put up elite numbers, 885 yards, 7 touchdowns. Also this year, targets and receiving game. Man, 56 targets and 51 catches. I mean, if he's able to do that from a PPR standpoint, he's clear running back 1, right? He's put up really, really good numbers the last, 7 weeks. So the last 7 weeks, he has been a top 10 running back outside of 1 week against Denver. And that was when the negative game script was there. But he's still just getting the volume. 193 attempts. You have to like that. So I still think Bijan is 101. And as far as running backs goes. So to me, from a roster perspective, if you have him, he's got to be in the A tier. That's kind of have those guys. Wilson's still there just based on talent. But damn it, Jets, get a quarterback. You're killing Garrett Wilson. I think that's going to hurt his consistency there. I still think you draft him as a wide receiver 1 on your roster, on your dynasty roster. But for Wilson, I think that's one of those builds. If you're building out your roster, you really got to get some veterans put in there that you can probably have some wide receiver 2 numbers. And that's where the question mark comes with where Wilson should be here or a little bit lower there. Now, next tier here, this is where you start seeing the running backs, because I do think that from a value perspective, they're too good to pass up at this point. But also from a value perspective, you don't want to put them in a higher tier because, hey, look at Gibbs. I love Gibbs. Jahmyr Gibbs was one of my guys going into the draft. I loved him at Georgia Tech. I've talked about him. I just think from Jahmyr Gibbs' perspective, what you deal with is David Montgomery. If David Montgomery wasn't there, Gibbs is the running back 1 smash. He might be in the A tier, right? He might be ahead of Bijan Robinson. And the one thing that makes Gibbs valuable from a PPR perspective is his receiving work, right? He's been pretty good there the last few games, especially as Monty's gone there. But, he's getting carries and he's getting usage there. You have to like what he's done. 1,000 yards rushing, the 10 touchdowns, you love that, right? And I think that you could argue Gibbs could just jump up next to Bijan, 1A to 1B, that's fine. I just think from a value perspective, I hate that Monty vultures everything that he does. And it's just one of those things is why I dropped him down a little bit. Again, I love Gibbs, and I think that he is a special talent from a PPR perspective. You plug him in and you just watch him, watch him cook, as the young guys say. But he's had basically 6 top 10 weeks this year. And that's fine. That you're going to win with that. You're going to see that. But there are those games where Monty kind of gets those touchdowns in the red zone. And you see that. Last 2 weeks, we've kind of seen that. And he's kind of been buoyed a little bit by receiving. He got that receiving touchdown against Green Bay that we saw this week in week 14 on Thursday. But again, I think just with Monty being there, it limits his value, right? Breece Hall, man, he's just been a bad year. Breece Hall has been a bad year on a bad Jets team. But I still think if you're starting up and you have a startup draft, he's still going first 2 rounds. Brian Thomas Jr. is the next one. I think that's an interesting one for me. I think that some would argue that he should be ahead of Harrison Jr., right? And I think from a production standpoint, it's not a bad call. And I think that he has Trevor Lawrence, and he's going to have a new offensive coordinator, probably a new head coach, hopefully, if the Jags get their crap together. So you're going to see that value up. I could definitely see him jumping up into that A tier if he continue this hot streak there. And the Devy Chain for me was another one, and really just comes down to system. Like, he is that guy from a receiving and rush standpoint. They've given him more usage this year, even in a down year for the Miami Dolphins. I think if they decide to move on from Tyreek Hill, I don't know what's going on there. I know the contract's a little big, and I do know the dead money is tough. But even then, Chain is kind of that guy. I mean, he's taken over for Waddle. Jalen Waddle was one of my sells a few weeks ago. I've talked about it. Like, a Chain's kind of the second best weapon in this offense. Hill's getting older. Maybe Devon Chain kind of goes into that range, and I think you'd be very happy with him being on your roster there. Now, in this next tier, this is where it gets fun. Jackson Smith-Njigba, Rashee Rice, Drake London, Chris Olave, and Sam Laporta. Now, before I get into Jackson Smith-Njigba, Rashee to me is a buy. I absolutely love what Rashee was able to do. When he was healthy, when you just seeing what he was able to do before he got injured, those first 4 games, man, he was out there just earning as many targets as he possibly could. 29 targets, 24 catches, very efficient, almost 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. He put up a wide receiver 1 type week, right, against Atlanta. He got injured against the Chargers in week 4, but I mean, he was great against Atlanta. Those 14 targets, they were really coming together there. Even week 1, he didn't get in the end zone, but he still finished as a PPR wide receiver 14, wide receiver 16. I think he's a clear low-end wide receiver 1-ish when he's healthy out there, and I think the Chiefs have missed him. Obviously, they had to go DeAndre. They had to see this. Xavier Worthy hasn't really done what he needed to do. I think Rashee's their wide receiver 1. He's tied to Patrick Mahomes. I know he's a little older than some of these other prospects. I think he deserves to be in here, and I think that he's getting really slept on out there based on kind of some of the polls that I've been doing, some of the dynasty trades that I've seen. Rashee's a guy to go kick the tires on right now. If you don't have a dynasty trade deadline, go kick the tires there. London is an interesting one. I got some YouTube comments there pissed at me for calling him a wide receiver 2, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think he is a solid wide receiver 2. He's in there. I think you're happy with having him as your wide receiver 2. But if he's your wide receiver 1, I think you're worried about kind of that outlook of what it looks like. I don't know what Kirk Cousins there. I think if you're a London owner, you want Michael Penix Jr. to be that guy. And I think that's really where it stands with him. Olave is the toughest one. I would say right now the toughest rank for me in this entire top 24 was Chris Olave. Super inconsistent. Concussions, the injuries that he's had. Derek Carr being there. Saints is a dumpster fire. Like, there's a lot of question marks there. I kind of put him here based on talent and the production that we saw, prior to this year, and even a little bit last year, he struggled too. But I put him in this category, but I'm not super comfortable with it. Sam Laporta at 16. I think from just, again, 1.5 tight end premium. The problem with Laporta is there's so many mouths to feed. They really run through that run game with Monty and Gibbs. Then they have James Williams, who's come on, and you're going to see in a little bit. I do understand there's so much of that, but I still think from a roster build perspective, if you have Laporta on your roster, he didn't just get bad, right? I think that he's going to get in the touchdown. They're going to get him alive again. And I still think from a roster value perspective, you put him here in the top 16. Now, the reason why I like Jackson Smith-Njigba being so high, he's been really, really, really good this year. I think when you're looking at just what he's been able to do, right? He's wide receiver 16, in fantasy points per game. He's 21st in deep targets. So he's gotten that. He has a 21% target share, which is second on the team but he is getting close to DK Metcalf, right? Almost 2 yards per route run, or 2.0 yards per route run. And in the first read shares where it's great. Fantasy Points has a great first read share. Data point, 24% there. They're looking for him, right? And they're really going after him and trying to target him as much as they can. I've been a big JSN guy, heading into the draft, where he goes. And I firmly believe that JSN could possibly be their wide receiver 1 next year. I love DK. I think that JSN's skill set fits this team better. I think that he's going to have a big year down the stretch here to really push him in there. He could have probably been in B for me, to be honest with you, like just how talented he is. I could have moved him up. I think he can still go up. And that's really where we're at. And you got to understand, JSN's only 22 years old, right? He's in that young category there. He could easily, if he's the wide receiver 1 on the Seahawks, as much as I hate Geno Smith, he could easily be in that A category next year. Right? I think that he has enough talent to push him there. And I think game script wise, I think Seattle, I think just overall, he could be their wide receiver 1. So that's the guy that's the biggest riser for me. I still say buy this kid. I still think he's still a value out there because he doesn't get value the way he should, and the outlook for him. I think people are still sleeping on DK, Tyler Lockett, all of those things, where he's clearly above Tyler Lockett. You see the first read share, the metrics, the numbers, they clearly point to JSN. For me, he's going to be their wide receiver 1. Go target him. And I think that I might be too low on him here. I think he maybe should be in B. I should have moved him up a little bit. Now, next tier, as we get a little bit deeper here, Bucky Irving, I'm going to kind of profile him. I'm going to talk about him here in a minute. He got 17. Ken Walker's at 18. George Pickens at 19. Kyron Williams is disgusting. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. Putting him in here is gross. But you know what he does? He scores fantasy points and scores touchdowns. So, you got to put him in here. If you have him rostered, he's under 25. He's got to find his way in the top 20, in my opinion, just based on production. And you might not like it. You might hate it. I know there's tons of people on social media, especially X, or I don't know about Blue Sky. I'm not over there skeeting. But on X, they always talk about how they hate that he's just a tumbler. He runs in the end zone, 1-yard touchdowns. I love my fantasy assets scoring points. So if he does that, I have to put him in the top 20. And then Zay Flowers kind of comes in there at that 21 spot. But Bucky, let's talk about Bucky, because I think, there's a lot of guys touting Bucky right now. In this last week that he played before, I've obviously recording this, he obviously had those 28 touches, 185 yards. And really, he's been up there, 65% snaps played in the last week. So he's been really balling out these last few weeks there. Since week 7, he's averaged 16 touches, over 100 yards per game, and he's basically a top 8 running back. Running back 7 in fantasy points per game. You have to like that. He has good explosive play rate, run rate there. 4th in missed tackles for us. So there's things that he's doing really well that you have to like. And then even, trying to look forward here, Sean Tucker is a non-factor to me. They might bring back, when think of Rashad White and him, but Bucky, it could see the volume as well. So he's already seeing that volume there. If they keep Cohen as their head coach, possibly, I think they're going to get rid of Bowles. But if they keep Cohen there, that he's their guy, right? They've shown that they want to give Bucky Irving that usage there. You have to like what he's been doing in PPR formats. In the last 3 weeks, he's been running back 1, 3, and 7. So if that's how he's going to finish this year out, and he's playing Las Vegas, right? That's an easy matchup. Dallas has been terrible this season. Carolina finishing the year, I mean, they've been a little bit better. He does have a tough game against the Chargers, but outside of that, he has an opportunity to really perform well down the stretch, and some people might have him higher here, right? I think I'm a little bit lower just because expectations, running backs, don't love the value in terms of running backs there, but I think he deserves to be in the D range, and he's ahead of some of those other running backs that got drafted way before him. Now, to finish out the top 24, I got Ladd McConkey. These are just the rookie wide receivers, right? Ladd's been fine, when you're looking at him since week 8. Wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game, a 25% target share-ish, 3.25 yards per route run. You like that. And the first read shares there, it's over 30%. Why? Because the Chargers got no one else to throw the ball to, right? The big thing is what does that look forward next year, right? Do they go out there and get a real wide receiver 1? They're tied to every damn free agent wide receiver out there. T. Higgins, all of the pipe dreams are out there. Or do they go in the draft and get a tight end, right? Do they get Tyler Warren from Penn State, Colson Loveland? Do they maybe wait to the 2nd or 3rd round, grab Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green, Mason Taylor from LSU, one of my favorite tight end sleepers, if you call him a sleeper right now. Those are the guys that maybe they go out and get. For McConkey, if they get a tight end, you're loving that. I think he could rise up the boards. Now, if they get a true wide receiver 1, I do think it helps out Ladd in the slot. I think he can go to a lot more, one-on-one situations, create the separation that he's needed there. So he might be able to rise up. He'll probably rise up anyway, just because some of these older running backs are going to dip down. but he is great to have out there. Jameson Williams, he's been kind of finally surged. I've been holding on to him for 3 years. Prior to this year, somebody had tweeted out saying, have you ever been in a wasted relationship for 3 years? And I quote tweeted, I said, well, we're going to find out with my guy, Jameson Williams, because I have him on a lot of dynasty rosters. And to me, he's done enough, right? Like he's kind of Deshaun Jackson light from a fantasy perspective. 3 or 4 catches, those big plays, right? And he scores those points. He's not so much feast or famine like Pickens. I think that's why Pickens isn't higher for me. Pickens is more of like, he's just unhinged. Like with Pickens, you don't know what you're going to get. I do think that Jameson has a little bit of that in him too. We've seen the off-field stuff as well. I think that's also when you're thinking of like why those two have dipped down a little bit. Off-field concerns, coaching concerns. They have 2 great coaches though around them, so that helps kind of limit your worry a little bit. But I think he's clearly a top 24 guy. So if you have Jameson, you waited. He's definitely shot up in value. And then Rome Odunze, I don't think we know what Rome is yet, right? If they don't bring back Keenan Allen, who's looked pretty good for the Bears, but if they decide this new coaching staff says, no, we're going to roll with Rome and DJ Moore, I think he immediately shoots up the value boards. I don't know how. I think him and Brian Thomas Jr. maybe shouldn't be that far apart if that happens, right? Based on even this board here, I think Rome is a buy, right? I was never a big Rome guy. I got yelled at by his dad on social media like everybody else going into the draft as far as wide receiver 1. But hey, he can be a very, very solid wide receiver 2. And I do think that there is going to be a very, very big window to go buy Rome Odunze if the manager is kind of going to shift off of him a little bit, because I do think he could pop into that C range here in the tiers. Now, these are my top 24. So in the comments, let me know. Be easy out there. But what do you think? Am I missing someone? I'm going to go through the outside the top 24 guys out there. But is there anybody you would put in different tiers? Just drop them. Love to have those discussions with you and just have some fun talking ball. So let me know. Is there anybody in here I missed? Is there people here you're too high, too low on? Would you put Bowers at that number 2 spot? Or would you have Neighbors there? Would you have Neighbors in the S tier? Where are you looking at? Where are you looking at from a dynasty value perspective? Now, just to wrap it up, outside the top 24, Keon Coleman, couldn't quite get him in there. Xavier Worthy, as much as I think he is a game changer, he has not done that this year, so you can't warrant a top 24 in there. Josh Downs is the interesting one. It's hard with Josh Downs tied with Anthony Richardson. I love Anthony Richardson, but from a passing perspective, Downs has kind of struggled there. I know back and forth getting on the field, I think is another thing that you got to look at with Downs. Jordan Addison is fine. Maybe some would have Jordan Addison here in the top 24. I just think in that offense surrounded by Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson, it's hard for Addison to really produce the numbers that you need consistently. I say that, and then he goes off. Then I put him in my starting lineup, and he gives me no catches, right? That's kind of the Addison experience from my perspective. Jonathan Brooks is unknown. I think, from that, he's looked good, but Chuba Hubbard just got a contract. Where's Jonathan Brooks? Trey Benson's not even on this outside top 24, but James Conner just got another contract. So I think that's the question mark with those guys. And then Kyle Pitts, believe it or not, is still under 25, y'all. I know it's crazy to think, but he's been absolutely abysmal. I wrote about him in our trade deadline article that I did. He's just not been good. He's looked uninterested, just doesn't look like he's getting the football. I cannot put him in the top 24 right now, just based on that. Just the inconsistency. He had a great first year, but ever since then, just been too damn inconsistent. And it's hard for me to trust him as a dynasty asset. So there's my outside. Drop it. Let me know who else is in there that you should be in there, maybe on the outside, or should some of these guys be jumped up into the top 24? What do you think? Dive in the comments. Appreciate you guys. I'll check you guys in the next video.